Hi, I'm Mr. Manoj Kulshrestha. I'm a consultant eye surgeon in Aberystwyth. It's my job to make the blind see. The eyes are the windows of the soul. Leonardo da Vinci, the man who discovered the telescope, said that the eyes were like the cosmos. They see all things astronomical, mathematical, and architectural. Many of the artists have eye disorders which are well documented, and by studying these eye disorders in more detail and looking at the pieces of artwork they produce, we can have a better understanding about how the art was actually shaped and designed by what the artists saw through their eyes. In an eye, if we anatomically go from the front to the back, there is a cornea, which is like the window of the eye that allows people to see. It's like the windscreen of a car. There's a lens. The lens is like the lens of a camera, which focuses light to the back of the eye. Behind the lens, there's a jelly, which we call the vitreous. And behind the vitreous, there is the retina, which is like the wallpaper within the eye. Within the retina, there are several cone cells, which are responsible for colour vision, which are largely concentrated in the fovea, which is in the centre of the back of the eye. And there are rod cells that are responsible for black and white vision. The eye is then connected to the brain by the optic nerve. So if we go from the front to the back of the eye, there are many artists who've had disorders of each part, of individual parts of the eye, that have subsequently shaped the type of artwork that they have produced. Monet, for example, developed cataract later on in life. He was an impressionist painter, and he lived in Giverny near Paris, where he had a house with a Japanese garden. While he was in his garden, he used to paint water lilies and the Japanese bridge. However, when he became older and he developed cataract, he found that he couldn't see so clearly. A cataract is an opacity within the lens. So as people get older, the lens gradually becomes more opaque. These days, if people develop cataract, eye surgeons carry out cataract surgery, which helps to improve their vision. Now, when Monet developed his cataract, he found that his painting was actually much more darker in colours, and he was using more browns and yellows rather than the classical purples and blue hues. So his paintings became, rather than impressionist, more expressionist in nature. He was actually painting what he saw. In the end, he did go to see a cataract surgeon, and he had his cataract extracted successfully. Now, behind the lens, there is the vitreous. The vitreous humour is a jelly-like substance, 99% of which consists of water. It also contains collagen and hyaluronic acid. Now, the jelly, as people get older, gradually becomes much more liquefied and forms little cystic cavities. As it degenerates, it shrinks and it can pull off the retina. As it does this, it can pull cells off the head of the optic nerve, and this causes a condition called posterior vitreous detachment. Now, Edvard Munch was an artist who had a disorder in his vitreous. Edvard Munch was a Norwegian artist who painted the landscapes and was most famous, of course, for his painting of the Scream, which is in a museum in Oslo. Many of his paintings depicted psychological terror, and quite often during his life, the one thing he was most afraid of was becoming blind. His left eye was already weak. It was a lazy eye. And later on in his life, his right eye developed a sudden loss of vision. And this was because of a bleed in his eye. The bleed was most likely because the jelly shrunk and pulled a blood vessel off the retina, which bled into the vitreous. This caused loss of sight in his right eye, and this made it difficult for him to paint, and he gradually became much more depressed during this period. It took about 9 months for the blood to clear, and Edvard Munch has graphically depicted paintings where he's actually shown us how the blood in his eye cleared over the course of time. Now, it's most likely, of course, that the blood was due to something called a posterior vitreous detachment, which can occur with age. And the posterior vitreous detachment pulled a blood vessel that caused that bleeding inside the eye. He was then left with a little bird-like floater in his vision, and many of his paintings have the hallmark of a little bird in the corner, which is probably due to this posterior vitreous detachment. There were, in fact, 4 versions of the screen. And the last version of the screen, we see the screen in the background like a ghost-like figure looking at a big bird. My interpretation of this painting is that he is depicting himself as the screen, and he, of course, was most fearful of becoming blind. And the thing he's most scared about is, of course, this big bird, which is the floater that he sees in his vision. Now, behind the vitreous is, of course, the retina. And in the centre of the retina, there is the macula. At the centre of the macula, of course, is the fovea, which is responsible for colour vision and fine visual acuity. The macula is like a carpet. If you leave a carpet for a very, very long period of time, it gradually wears down, and people develop a condition called macular degeneration, which is one of the commonest causes of blindness in the UK. Now, Edward Degas developed a condition affecting his macula. But this didn't happen in old age, this happened when he was younger, in his early 30s. He found that he was developing blindness in one of his eyes due to macular disease. His sister-in-law also suffered from a similar condition, with blindness affecting one eye. So he most probably had a hereditary maculopathy. That means a disease affecting the macula that is hereditary and runs in families. He was also the only impressionist who painted indoors, because when he was outdoors, he suffered from photophobia. After a number of years, he also developed blindness in his other eye, and yet he was still able to paint exquisite paintings of dancers, especially ballet dancers, indoors. And these paintings became known as the Dancers of Degas. They have exquisite colours with the pinks, with high contrast. And of course the high contrast he was able to see clearly with due to his poor vision.